You shouldn't be sitting with her. Do you know who that woman is? That's what the server whispered to my son the moment he saw who was placed beside me. I watched his face drain of color, pure panic crawling across his expression like he'd just seen a ghost walk into his wedding. I wasn't supposed to hear the whisper, I wasn't supposed to understand why he froze, and I definitely wasn't supposed to know why he had placed me near the service area, behind a pillar, far from the family table, as if I were an inconvenience he needed to tuck away. But all of that stopped mattering the instant the woman next to me turned her head and smiled like she'd been waiting for this moment for decades. And when she finally spoke to me, I realized my son wasn't terrified of where I was sitting. He was terrified of who I was sitting with. Weddings are supposed to be warm, joyful, full of those tiny, quiet moments that you hold on to for the rest of your life. But nothing about the moment I walked into that reception hall felt joyful. Not when I saw my son look past me like I was part of the wallpaper. Not when the wedding planner guided me toward the back. Not the back row, no. But a table behind the back row, close enough to the service station that I could smell dish soap and hear trays clattering. I told myself it was a mistake. A logistical mix-up. Something that would make sense if I just stayed calm. But when I reached the table, I saw the name cards. Table 14, overflow, staff adjacent. And there, tucked underneath, in small print, mother of groom. I stood perfectly still, the kind of stillness you learn after years of swallowing things you're too tired to fight. People bustled past me, laughing, adjusting dresses, taking pictures. Not one of them noticing the woman in blue standing by a table that wasn't meant for her. I sat down quietly, gracefully. Because even humiliation deserves dignity. A server brushed by me carrying glasses. He glanced at the name cards, frowned a little, but said nothing. It wasn't his fault. He was just doing his job. I placed my purse on my lap, let out a slow breath, and told myself, don't ruin his wedding. Don't make a scene. Just smile. But then, a soft shuffle of feet behind me. A chair pulled out, and someone lowered themselves into the seat beside mine with a quiet exhale that sounded familiar, too familiar. I didn't turn right away, just looked at her hands first. Veins raised, knuckles slightly swollen, a thin, old-fashioned bracelet that clicked softly as she settled her wrist on the tablecloth. Then her voice. Hello. I was told this is my seat. Polite, soft, but with an undertone, a kind of confidence I didn't expect. I turned my head, and the moment my eyes met hers, the room shifted. Just slightly. Like something heavy had clicked into place inside my chest. She smiled at me, not like a stranger, but like someone who knew me. Someone who had been waiting. I forced a polite nod. Hello, I'm the groom's mother. Oh, I know, she said calmly. I'm aware of who you are. Her answer was so smooth, so matter-of-fact, that a small shiver crawled up my spine. Before I could ask her anything, my son appeared across the room. He was laughing with the photographer, until he turned his head and saw us, saw her, saw me sitting beside her. And just like that, his entire expression collapsed. His shoulders tensed. His smile vanished. His hand, the one holding his champagne glass, tightened so hard I thought it might crack. He looked horrified. Not annoyed. Not embarrassed. Horrified. I watched color drain from his face like someone had pulled a plug. My breath caught. Because I knew that look. I'd seen it when he was a little boy and a secret he'd hidden finally slipped out. Fear, guilt, panic. But this wasn't childhood mischief. This was something bigger, darker, something he thought he'd buried. He whispered something to his best man, eyes still locked on our table, and the best man shot a startled look toward the woman sitting beside me, like he knew her too, like he recognized her, feared her. I swallowed hard. In all the years I'd raised my son through struggle and sacrifice and silence, I had never once seen him look at me like that. Not with dread, not with alarm, not like he was watching a nightmare walk into his wedding. But he wasn't looking at me. He was looking at the woman next to me, and she just smiled back at him with a calmness that made my skin prickle. Then she leaned closer to me, just enough for her words to reach my ear, and whispered, "He never expected I'd show up. But some truths don't stay hidden forever." My body went cold, because the way she said it, like she'd been waiting years for this moment, told me one thing. This wedding wasn't the only thing falling apart today. People see a groom and his mother at a wedding and they imagine closeness. They imagined tenderness, pride, the soft warmth of memories shared, first days of school, scraped knees, graduations, birthday candles blown out. But nobody ever imagines the distance, the quiet spaces that grow over years when a mother holds her pain in one hand and her child in the other, always choosing the child, even when the pain is heavier. As I sat there watching my son try so desperately to pretend everything was fine, my mind slipped backward, to the years when it was just the two of us. I had him when I was 21, young, too inexperienced to be anyone's mother, but stubborn enough to try anyway. His father left before the baby shower. I remember standing in the kitchen holding a stack of invitations I never sent, because the man whose name was printed beside mine was already gone. So it was just the two of us from the very beginning. I worked nights at a diner and cleaned houses during the day. Sometimes I'd be so tired that I'd fall asleep sitting up with him on my chest, still wearing my apron. But he was worth it. Every exhaustion, every sacrifice, every dream I quietly folded away. When he was a boy, he adored me. He'd cling to my leg when I dropped him at school, run into my arms at pickup, crawl into bed when he had nightmares. And even in the darkest moments, when bills piled up and the fridge was nearly empty, I felt invincible because he looked at me like I hung the moon. But boys grow, and so does the distance. It started small, a slammed door, a curt answer, an embarrassment when I showed up to school conferences in my thrift store dress, smelling faintly of bleach from the houses I cleaned. Then came the teenage years. The years he couldn't stand me, couldn't stand being seen with me, couldn't stand the life I fought so hard to hold together. He wanted nice things, branded shoes, school trips, a phone, a life he thought everyone else had except him, and when I couldn't give him all of it, resentment grew in the empty spaces. I tried to explain, tried to tell him I was only one person, but to a teenage boy, a mother's limits looked like failures. By the time he left for college, he didn't hug me goodbye. He only said, "I'll call when I can." He didn't call, not for weeks. Sometimes not for months, but I never missed his birthdays. Never missed a holiday. Never stopped sending him grocery money, even when it meant skipping meals myself. And slowly, after years of silence, short texts, and brief visits that felt more like obligations, I accepted it. I had raised a man who no longer saw me. Not really, not the way I saw him. When he told me he was getting married, I cried. Not because he'd chosen someone, I was happy for that. I cried because he told me in a text message after 6 months of barely speaking. And then he added, "My fiancé's family is traditional. So just please, Mom, try to blend in. Don't overstep. I don't want any drama." Blend in? As if I'd ever been allowed to stand out. I spent weeks picking the right dress. Not flashy, not too humble, just elegant enough to say I belonged, even if no one else believed it. But the moment I arrived at the wedding venue, I knew. The long glances, the forced smiles, the quick whispers exchanged between his new in-laws. Everyone had been placed carefully. Parents of the bride near the head table, relatives near the center, friends near the dance floor. And I was placed near the service area. Across the room, behind a pillar, half hidden from the celebration, like a shame someone didn't want photographed. A place where I couldn't be heard, where I wouldn't be seen. I swallowed the humiliation because that's what mothers do. We absorb pain silently so our children don't have to. But when she sat next to me, this woman with the serene smile and the eyes filled with history, everything shifted. Because the way my son looked at her wasn't annoyance or embarrassment or inconvenience, it was fear. Fear of a truth that he prayed would stay buried. Fear of a past he never wanted me to face. Fear of a secret that woman carried in the quiet lines of her face. And as the music played and guests clinked glasses, the woman beside me placed her hand lightly on mine. A touch so gentle it sent a shiver down my spine. "My dear," she whispered, "I didn't come for the wedding. I came for you." Her words were soft, but they cracked something open inside me that had been locked tight for decades. And in that moment I realized, this wasn't just a wedding, it was a reckoning. Looking back, the warning signs were already there. Quiet, subtle, sliding past me because I wanted so badly to believe my son simply loved me, even if he didn't always show it. But in the weeks before the wedding, the truth had already started whispering. I just refused to listen. 3 weeks before the ceremony, his fiancé's mother called me. Not my son, not the couple, just her mother. Her voice was polite but coated in that artificial sweetness wealthy women use, when they're trying to keep a distance without sounding cruel. "Hi, this is Linda, Evan's future mother-in-law." I smiled even though she couldn't see me. "Oh, hello, it's so nice to hear from you." "Yes, well," she paused, too long. "We just wanted to confirm that you're attending." Confirm, like my presence was an optional hazard they needed to prepare for. I swallowed the sting. "Of course I'm attending. He's my son." "Yes, right," she murmured, then exhaled stiffly, "just making sure everything is coordinated." Coordinated. The word landed hard, like they were arranging centerpieces, not people. A few days later, my son stopped by my apartment, unannounced, nervous, smelling faintly of cologne and stress. He didn't sit, just stood by the doorway like he was on a countdown timer. "Mom, about the wedding." I looked up from the laundry basket. "Yes?" He rubbed the back of his neck, avoiding my eyes. "There's a seating chart. Everything is very carefully arranged. You know how her family is." I nodded, but something about the word arranged pricked at my chest. He continued, "And, Mom, please don't wear anything too bold. I mean, just keep it simple." I blinked slowly. "I wasn't planning to wear a circus costume, Evan." He flinched, a small guilty twitch. "Right, I didn't mean it like that. I just want everything to go smoothly." Smoothly. As if I had ever been the problem. As if I had ever caused scenes. As if I hadn't spent years shrinking myself so he'd feel proud to stand beside me. He hugged me briefly before leaving, a quick, stiff hug. No warmth, no lingering. And as he walked down the hall, I had the strangest feeling that he was more relieved leaving than arriving. 1 week before the wedding, I met his fiancé's family for the first time at a pre-reception dinner. I wore a modest navy dress and a necklace my son gave me when he was 13. The last birthday gift he'd picked out himself before distance became the language between us. When I arrived, the bride's parents exchanged a glance, the kind people make when something is less than they expected. Her father barely shook my hand. Her mother smiled thinly and said my dress was sweet, in a tone that made it sound like an insult. During the meal, whenever I tried to speak, they would politely redirect the conversation, as if my stories didn't fit the table's aesthetic. And my son? He barely looked at me, laughed at their jokes, drank wine with her cousins, folded himself neatly into their world. I kept watching him, my boy, my only child, and I wondered when he learned to make himself so comfortable in rooms where I wasn't welcome. Halfway through dinner, a family member I'd never met leaned over and asked, "So you and Evan? You two are close?" Close. The word hit like a bruise being touched. I opened my mouth to answer. To say yes, to say of course, to say I raised him alone and poured everything I had into him. But before I could speak, his fiancé's mother placed a hand on the woman's arm and said, "They're fine. They have their own dynamic." Their own dynamic. As if we were a complicated footnote in her daughter's perfect story. The final sign came the day before the wedding. My son called. He sounded rushed, out of breath, like someone was standing beside him listening to every word. "Mom, listen, about tomorrow. They changed some seating things. It's complicated. So if you're not right near the front, don't take it the wrong way." I closed my eyes. "I won't," I whispered. He exhaled loudly, relieved. Too relieved. "Okay, good. Just show up a little early and follow the planner's directions." Planner's directions. As if I were staff. As if this weren't my son's wedding. We hung up and I sat on my couch holding the phone in my lap, feeling something I hadn't felt in years. Forgotten. Not rejected. Not resented. Forgotten. Which is somehow worse. So as I sat at table 14 next to the service station and behind the pillar, I wasn't actually surprised. Hurt, yes. Humiliated, yes. But not surprised. What did surprise me was the woman who took the seat beside me with that calm, knowing smile, because I didn't know her. But clearly my son did, and the kind of fear I saw on his face when he realized she was sitting with me, not hidden in another corner, told me one thing. Whatever secret he was keeping, she was part of it, and she was done staying quiet. The woman beside me kept her hands neatly folded in her lap, as if she were sitting in a quiet church pew rather than a wedding reception, buzzing with music and clinking glasses. Her presence was unsettling, not threatening, no, just quiet in a way that felt intentional, like someone who'd spent a long time waiting for the right moment to step out of the shadows. I studied her from the corner of my eye. She wasn't overdressed, but she wasn't simple either. Everything she wore looked chosen carefully. The pale blue dress, the small vintage brooch pinned near her shoulder, the thin bracelet clicking softly whenever she moved. She didn't look like staff. She didn't look like a distant relative. She didn't look like someone who belonged at table 14 any more than I did. I cleared my throat softly. "You're a guest of the bride or the groom?" She smiled, but her eyes didn't mirror the smile. "I suppose you could say I'm a guest of the truth." It was such a strange answer that for a moment I wondered if I'd misheard her over the music. Before I could respond, she leaned back, tilted her head slightly as if she were listening to something inside her own memory, and said, "He was so handsome today, wasn't he? Your son?" My breath caught. "Yes." She nodded. "I haven't seen him in a long time, not since he was a teenager." My heart stumbled. I turned fully toward her. "You know my son?" "Oh, very well," she said quietly, much better than he'd like to admit. A cold ripple went through me. My son had never mentioned any older woman in his life, never spoken of any mentor, relative, neighbor, or teacher that matched the serenity in this woman's presence. "Forgive me," I said gently. "I don't recognize you. How did you know Evan?" She looked at me for a long moment. Too long. A searching, deliberate look that made the hairs on my arms stand up. Finally, she said, "Your son and I share a history you don't know about, one he hoped you'd never discover." My pulse quickened, not in panic, in dread. "What history?" I whispered. Before she could answer, a loud cheer erupted from the dance floor as the newlyweds were introduced. Everyone stood, clapping and shouting, giving the room a chance to disguise my trembling voice. But she didn't clap. She didn't smile. She just watched my son walk in, watched him avoid looking anywhere near table 14 and whispered, "He's trying very hard to pretend I'm not here." I swallowed, my throat suddenly dry. Why would he pretend that? Her gaze flicked to mine, sharper than before. "Because he's afraid of what I know, and of what you might ask." My hands grew cold. "I don't understand." "You will," she murmured, "but not yet. This isn't the moment." A server brushed past us with a tray full of champagne flutes, nearly bumping her shoulder. She didn't even flinch. She turned to me again, her voice low, weighted with something I couldn't name. "Tell me something," she said. "When Evan was a boy, did he ever come home with a lie in his mouth and fear in his eyes?" The question sliced through me. Because yes, he had. Too many times. When he was 12 and lied about staying late at a friend's house but came home shaken. When he was 15 and said he'd been studying but smelled faintly of cigarette smoke. When he was 17 and walked through the door with his hands trembling and refused to tell me why. I never pushed, never pried. He was a good student, a quiet boy, and I didn't want to smother him. But the fear that I never forgot. I nodded slowly. "Yes, he did." The woman's expression softened into something like sorrow. "He wasn't lying to hurt you," she said. "He was lying to protect you." My breath stilled. "Protect me from what?" She touched the rim of her water glass lightly, a soft click of her fingernail filling the space between us. "From someone who should have loved you," she said quietly, "but didn't." My chest tightened. There was only one person she could mean. His father. I stared at her, unable to speak. Before I could ask anything more, a shadow fell across the table. My son. He stood there frozen, eyes locked on the woman beside me, the color draining from his face completely. "Mom," he said in a strangled whisper. "Can I talk to you? Now." His voice cracked, not with anger, with panic, and the woman beside me simply folded her hands, exhaled softly, and said, "It's time he stops running from this." My son's eyes darted between us, me and the woman beside me, like he was watching a disaster unfold in slow motion. I had seen him scared before, as a boy, when storms rolled in, when he was called to the principal's office, when he accidentally broke the window with a baseball. But this was different. This fear had age on it. History. Weight, like a shadow he'd been running from for years. He leaned toward me, voice low and tight. "Mom, please, get up." I didn't move. Something in my stomach told me that if I stood, if I followed him, I would be walking away from the truth he'd buried deep enough to forget what it looked like. The woman beside me placed one hand gently on the tablecloth and said with steady calm, "Evan, you knew this day would come." He flinched at her voice. "Don't," he whispered. His jaw clenched so hard the muscles trembled. "Not here, not today." "It has to be today," she said softly, "or it will never be." His breath caught, a tiny sound, but the kind that told me he was standing on the edge of something he'd hoped never to revisit. I felt my own heartbeat rising, heavy and uncertain. "Evan," I said, keeping my voice gentle. "Who is she?" He swallowed. Hard. His eyes glistened, not with tears, but with the pure desperation of someone whose secrets were slipping from his hands. "I was going to tell you someday," he whispered, dead, just not like this. Not at my wedding. The woman exhaled. "You weren't going to tell her at all." He shut his eyes in pain as if the words cut straight through him. I looked between them, feeling the world tilt slightly under my feet. "Tell me what?" I asked quietly. Silence. Long. Dense. So loud I could hear the bass of the wedding music thumping faintly from across the room. Finally she spoke. "He came to my house," she said. "Your husband." My blood ran cold. My husband. The man who walked away before my son was born. The ghost who never left a trace. "He wasn't running from you," she continued. "He was running from himself." Evan grabbed the back of a chair, knuckles white. "Stop it," he whispered, "please." But the woman wasn't cruel. She wasn't angry. Her voice was the voice of someone who had carried a secret so long it had begun to hollow her out. "He didn't leave because he didn't love you," she said to me. "He left because he had another life. A life he hid from both of you." Evan covered his face. A chill crawled up my spine. "Another life?" I repeated. "Yes," she said, "and I was part of it." My breath caught, my world twisted, my vision blurred. "What do you mean, part of it?" She didn't look away, not once. "I was his wife." The air collapsed from my lungs. Wife. Wife. My son's hands fell from his face. He looked at me, broken, ashamed, frozen. "Mom," he whispered, but the word cracked apart in his throat. I stared at the woman, at her steady expression, at the quiet tragedy behind her eyes. "You," I whispered, "you're telling me he was married to both of us?" She nodded. "For 10 years. My heart slammed against my ribs. A decade of lies, while I raised our son alone, believing I'd simply been abandoned. The woman's fingers trembled slightly as she reached into her small purse and pulled out a photograph. She slid it across the table toward me. A younger version of her stood beside a man I recognized instantly, the same smile, the same jawline, the same dimples my son inherited. He looked happy, warm, present. Nothing like the man who vanished from my life without leaving a goodbye. My stomach turned, I lifted my head, my voice barely above a whisper. "How long did you know about me?" "Not until the end," she said. "He hid you from me, just like he hid me from you." My eyes stung, my throat burned. Evan finally spoke, the words spilling out raw and trembling. "Mom, I found out when I was 16. My head snapped toward him. 16? He nodded, breath shaking. "He contacted me. Dad did. He said he wanted to meet. I thought he wanted to apologize. I thought he wanted to explain why he left." I felt something inside me shatter. "You met him?" I whispered. Evan's eyes filled with agony. "I'm so sorry, Mom. I didn't know how to tell you. I didn't want to break you." I gripped the edge of the table. "What did he tell you?" Evan swallowed, voice cracking at the edges. "He told me he'd been living 2 lives, that he loved 2 women, 2 families, and he couldn't choose." A long, cold exhale slipped from the woman beside me. "He chose the easiest thing," she said, running. Evan nodded miserably. "He told me not to tell you. Said it would destroy you. Said the truth would be too much." I stared at my son, my boy, my only child, and suddenly the distance of all those years made excruciating sense. He hadn't pulled away because he didn't love me. He pulled away because he was carrying a truth too heavy for a child to bear. And her? I whispered. How does she fit into this? Evan wiped his eyes. Dad got sick. He only had a few months. She took care of him. She reached out to me when things got worse. I visited him once. My chest ached. The woman placed a gentle hand on my arm. I came today, she said softly, because your son has carried this alone for far too long. Evan dropped to a slow crouch beside me, like a man kneeling under the weight of his own past. Mom, I wasn't ashamed of you. I was ashamed of the truth. I didn't know how to give you a wedding day without giving you the pain you never deserved. For the first time in years, I saw my son not as the distant man he'd become, but as the scared 16-year-old who had learned the ugliest truth a boy could learn about the father he longed for. My voice shook as I whispered, Evan, why did she sit with me? The woman answered for him, because the truth belongs to you too, and it was time you finally heard it. For a long moment, none of us spoke. The music from the dance floor thumped faintly in the background, a happy song in the wrong world, in the wrong moment, falling on top of a truth that had just shattered everything I thought I knew. My son slowly rose from the crouch beside me. He wasn't the confident groom anymore. He looked like a boy again, frightened, exposed, covered in dust from a collapsed secret he'd tried so hard to keep hidden. Mom, he whispered, and please, can we go somewhere else? Somewhere private? But the woman beside me shook her head gently. The truth doesn't belong in shadows, Evan. Not anymore. He closed his eyes, pain carved into his features like a sculpture. I didn't want this, he said. I didn't want today to be about him. I steadied my breath. The hurt sat heavy on my tongue, but my voice came out calmer than I felt. Today isn't about him, I said. It's about you and what you've carried. He winced, the guilt almost visible in the air between us. Before he could speak, a familiar voice cut through the noise. Evan? What's going on? Why are you over here? His bride. She stepped toward us, her dress glowing under the reception lights, confusion tightening her brow. Behind her trailed her mother, her father, and two bridesmaids who had clearly noticed the tension. Her mother's eyes narrowed the moment she spotted me, as if I were responsible for whatever was happening. What is all this? She demanded. Why are we huddled by the service area? Everyone is waiting for the first dance. My son swallowed hard. This is my mom, he said softly. I just needed to talk to her. His fiancée frowned. You can talk to her later. Everyone's watching, Evan. Her mother sharply added, This isn't the time for family drama. But the woman beside me, the one who had carried the truth for years, sat perfectly still, her presence grounding me in a moment where everything felt like it was slipping. She turned her calm gaze toward the bride's mother and said simply, You might want to sit down. The bride's mother recoiled, offended. I beg your... But before she could finish, my son snapped. Stop. The entire group froze. Even the servers paused as if sensing the tension. He ran a trembling hand through his hair. You all keep talking about timing, about appearances, but you don't understand. This isn't drama. This is my family's truth. The truth I should have faced a long time ago. The bride's father stepped forward, voice firm. Son, we're in the middle of a wedding. Your wedding. Handle this after the ceremony. My son shook his head. No. His voice cracked. I can't keep pretending. I've been pretending since I was 16. His bride blinked, her expression softening. Evan, what happened? He looked at her with such raw sadness that even she took a small step back. Then he looked at me, and for the first time in years I saw the boy who used to run into my arms for safety. She deserves to know, he whispered. The bride touched his arm gently. Know what? He inhaled shakily. She needs to know why I've been distant the last few weeks, why I've been terrified something would go wrong today, why I begged the planner to put my mom far from the main tables. Her mother gasped quietly, not out of sympathy, but out of embarrassment. I stiffened. You told them to seat me here? Evan's face collapsed. I'm sorry, he whispered. I just didn't want her. He motioned toward the woman beside me, to sit near the head table or near you, in case someone recognized her. The bride's mother scoffed. And who exactly is she? Before my son could answer, the woman finally stood. Slow, graceful, composed. She looked directly at my son's bride, her voice quiet but carrying the gravity of decades. I'm the other wife. The words hit the room like a dropped chandelier. The bride gasped. Her mother's mouth fell open. Her father swore under his breath. One of the bridesmaids clutched her pearls. Literally. My son closed his eyes as if bracing for the fallout. I felt my heart twist again, not in shock but in grief for all the years my son carried this alone. The bride whispered, horrified, "Evan, what does she mean?" His voice cracked. My father. He had 2 families, 2 wives, 2 houses, 2 lives. The bride staggered slightly. And you knew? Evan nodded miserably. Since I was 16. Her eyes widened with betrayal, not because of the secret itself, but because she had just realized. She married a man who had learned to bury pain so deeply that part of him had gone numb. The reception hall buzzed with whispers, heads turning, laughter dying, curiosity rising. A wedding was unraveling, and in the center of it, me, my son, and the woman who shared a past I never chose. I closed my eyes, exhaled, and whispered, "This ends tonight." Because some truths don't stay buried, and some wounds don't close until someone finally dares to stop the bleeding. Silence. For the first time that night, the reception hall went completely silent. Even the DJ, mid-transition between songs, lowered the volume as he sensed something far heavier than spilled champagne or family bickering. My son stood there, chest heaving, the bride gripping his arm, the in-laws pale and stiff like porcelain figurines that might crack if touched. And I felt like someone had unplugged the world. I wasn't angry. Not the kind of anger that screams or throws or breaks. It was quieter, deeper. A kind of exhaustion that reaches the soul after years of holding pain with both hands and pretending it weighs nothing. I turned to my son and whispered so softly he had to lean in to hear, "You should enjoy your wedding." His face crumpled. "Mom, please, don't leave." But I stepped back because staying felt like drowning. Like I was trapped in a room built out of secrets I never asked to carry. I didn't make a scene, didn't shout, didn't accuse. I simply picked up my purse and began walking toward the exit. Gasps rippled through the room. Because isn't it ironic? The woman they placed near the service station, the one they tried to hide, was now the person every pair of eyes followed. As I walked, I heard snippets of whispers. "That's the groom's mother? Did you hear what she said? 2 wives? Who is that older woman with her?" But none of it mattered. Not then. My son hurried after me, footsteps frantic. He caught my arm gently. "Mom," he said, voice breaking, "I didn't want you to find out like this." I turned to him slowly. "Evan," I whispered, "you were a child. You never should have been the one to carry an adult man's betrayal. I'm not angry at you." Relief flickered across his face, but only for a second, because then he asked the question I wish he hadn't. "So, you're not leaving because of me?" I cupped his cheek, my thumb brushing the line of a tear he was too proud to let fall. "I'm leaving," I said softly, "because I finally see how much you've been hurting, and you deserve a chance to have a wedding day that isn't drowning in your father's ghost." He swallowed hard. "Mom." But before he could say another word, the woman, the other wife, approached us slowly. Her face held none of the chaos around us, just a quiet grief and the kind of compassion that only comes from surviving something similar. "Evan," she said gently, "let her go." He stiffened. "No, she needs to hear—" "No," she interrupted. "She needs peace, and you need to stop trying to fix what isn't broken in her, only what broke in you." Her words, simple, steady, cut through the room like a soft blade. I turned to her, feeling both drawn to her and terrified of her. "Why did you come?" I asked. "Why today?" She held my gaze. "Because he asked me to." I froze. "Who?" "Your husband," she said quietly. "In his last days, he made me promise that if I ever saw your son getting married, I would tell you the truth, all of it, even the parts he didn't have the courage to face." A breath slipped out of me like a wound reopening. "Why?" I whispered. "Why would he want that?" She stepped closer, her voice softened into something almost maternal. "He didn't want his lies to become your son's inheritance." My vision blurred. For a moment I couldn't breathe. She continued, "You raised him with strength. Your husband knew that. He saw it. And he knew, If anyone could keep Evan from repeating his mistakes, it was you. Tears slipped onto my cheeks before I could stop them. She placed a hand on my arm. Go home tonight, she said, but come back tomorrow morning. Your son will need you. Not as the woman he tried to protect, but as the mother who has always stood by him. Then she pressed something small into my hand, a folded envelope. He wanted you to have this, she whispered, after everything. My fingers shook around it. She stepped back, giving me space, giving me grace. My son stood there, tearful, broken open, his bride holding his hand like she wasn't sure if he might collapse. I gave him a small, trembling nod. Be happy tonight, I said. That's all I've ever wanted for you. And then, with the envelope clutched against my chest, I walked out of the wedding quietly, gracefully, the way I've walked through every painful chapter of my life. Except this time, I wasn't walking away from the truth. I was walking toward it. I didn't open the envelope at the wedding, or in the car, or even when I got home. It sat on my kitchen table under the dim glow of the overhead light, looking small and harmless, like it didn't contain the last echoes of a man who split two women's lives down the middle and left two children navigating the wreckage. I made tea I didn't drink, sat in silence I didn't break, and stared at the envelope until fear gave way to resolve. With a steady breath, I opened it. Inside was a single sheet of folded paper and a photograph. The photograph came first. It was him. Younger, but with the same gentle eyes my son inherited. He wasn't posing, wasn't smiling, just sitting on a porch somewhere looking off into the distance like he was listening to thoughts he couldn't say out loud. On the back, in faded ink, he'd written, I broke what wasn't mine to break. I hope someday she forgives me. I swallowed hard and unfolded the letter. His handwriting was the same, neat, careful, the way it had been when he used to leave me little notes on the fridge before he disappeared from our lives. If you're reading this, it began, it means she kept her promise. My throat tightened. I don't deserve this space on your table or in your memory, but I need you to know one thing. I never left because of you. The tears I'd held back all night finally broke. I was a coward, and cowards rarely get second chances, so I built a life where I could pretend I was someone better. It didn't make me better. It only made the lies louder. I pressed a hand to my mouth, holding back a sob. Our son deserved the whole truth, but I put that weight on his shoulders instead of my own. If you can forgive me for anything, let it be that. I sat there, breathing unevenly, letting the words wash over me. You raised him well, better than I ever could have, better than I deserved. A tear slipped off my chin onto the page. Do not think for a moment that my leaving was a reflection of your worth. It was a reflection of my weakness. The last lines were the hardest. I hope one day the seat they give you is worthy of you, because I never gave you one. I folded the letter carefully, hands trembling, heartbreaking and healing at the same time. The next morning, as promised, I returned to the venue. Not because I owed it to anyone, but because she had been right. My son would need me. The staff were clearing decorations, tables half dismantled, champagne flutes soaking in bins. The room that had felt so loud last night now sat in a peaceful wake of what had unfolded. I found him outside, near the garden archway where he and his bride had taken their first photos as husband and wife. He looked exhausted, eyes swollen, tie loosened, hair disheveled like he'd spent the entire night running from thoughts that kept catching him. When he saw me, he didn't speak, didn't apologize, didn't try to explain. He just stepped forward and wrapped his arms around me with a desperation I hadn't felt from him in decades. Mom, he whispered into my shoulder, voice breaking. I am so sorry. I held him tightly, the same way I held him when he cried over scraped knees and teenage heartbreaks and dreams that didn't pan out. I know, I whispered, and I forgive you, but you can't carry secrets like that anymore. They eat people alive. He nodded against me. I thought I was protecting you, he said, but all I did was lose pieces of myself. I pulled back, cupping his face gently. You didn't lose yourself, I said. You just forgot where you came from. He let out a shaky breath, half sob, half relief. His bride approached quietly, nervous but sincere. Mrs. Hale, she said softly, I didn't know. I'm sorry if I ever made you feel unwelcome. I offered her a small, tired smile. You didn't know the story. Now you do. Let's make sure we write better ones going forward. She nodded, relieved. And for the first time in years, my son looked at me not with distance, not with guardedness, but with clarity. Real, raw, painful, healing clarity. He took my hand and said, "Mom, I want you at my table, always. No more corners, no more hiding." And standing there, in the quiet aftermath of broken truth and rebuilt understanding, I finally realized something. I wasn't seated near the service area because I wasn't worthy. I was seated there because my son didn't know how to let his past sit beside his future. Now he did. And that was enough.